So yes, I am the path, I am the door. And I'll begin with a quotation by Michael Robbins. And he said, "This is the path, there are no compromises." And this picture is from him in the last Ray 1 SRI conference. And that was the one in 2017, 9 years ago. And in alignment with Ray 1, that quotation shows very strongly that the spiritual path is important, the spiritual path is demanding, and the spiritual path requires absolute integrity. So having established that basis, let's go on to look at the path itself and what it symbolizes. So what is a path? A path is a route from one location to another, or in a more spiritual context, from one vibration to another. And a path can be followed, or a path can be created, such as when we create or build the Antichrona. And a path can have checkpoints or points, important points along the way, or a path can ultimately be endless. And there are many examples of paths in the ancient wisdom. Like there's the path of evolution that most are on, leading to the probationary path of the start of the spiritual path. There's the path of discipleship, and then the later path of initiation. And another significant example of a path is the golden path as described to the Master DK in our meditations, which is described or quoted as to endeavor to see, stretching between yourself, the group, and me, a band of golden light, and know this to be the symbol of the path which we are all treading. See this path gradually shortening, thus bringing us closer together, slowly and steadily. And there are other terms for the path, like there can be not just a path, but sort of the more concrete symbol of the road. And that's more kind of more grounded, and that also in the blue books are the rules of the road, the 6 rules of the road, and it contains the phrase of, upon that road one wanders not alone. Some move ahead, he follows after. Some move behind, he sets the pace, which shows that we can be at different points along the path we follow. There's also a more abstract way to consider the path, which is a way, and that aligns with the way of higher evolution that's even beyond the path of initiation. And this can be a way. Here's a quotation about the way. Before me streams the path of light, I see the way. Behind me lies the mountain path, with stones and cobbles on the way. Around me are thorns. My feet are tired. But straight ahead stretches the lighted way, and on that way I walk. And related to the path is the example of Jesus saying, "Follow me." And what that statement is getting at is that there's a path. We want to follow the path with Jesus, or the path that Jesus took. And that's really more, and it's not like a submitting to some figure or just believing in some figure, but actually following the path that they follow. So another symbol related to the path is the maze. And a maze can describe a type of path and can show the process of following or navigating a path. And a maze is like a puzzle that has challenge to make our way through. And a maze shows the important concept that the path that we follow may branch. And that means that the seeker has choices to make along the way on their path. And it indicates that there are right versus wrong ways that can take, like hitting dead ends or so on. And that, of course, an example from Esotericism's is the left versus right hand paths towards like more materialism versus more spirituality, and we want to choose the right path. And a maze has a both as a actual maze as well as the symbol of a maze, there's a definite start point and a definite goal for a maze. And this goal to a maze, it may be like in the center of the maze, which generally represents like an interior treasure that we're seeking or illumination that we're seeking as we penetrate into the maze. Or a goal with a maze can be to get out of the maze, in which case the finding the exit, in which case the maze represents like Maya or the personality restrictions, and we're seeking to exit that maze. Now, a maze shows that the path and life in general, it has blindness or confusion where we can't really see over the walls, so we don't know necessarily the right way to go. The maze introduces the concept of restriction, like there's walls that force us to take certain ways or not take other ways. And that, of course, that the maze has the risk of encountering dead ends, forcing us to backtrack, or the maze may make us go in circles and repeat the ways we've gone before. Now, symbolically, a maze has the interesting balance or interaction between fate and free will. Like it's often the concept like, do we have free will, or is everything fated? And the maze shows that it's really like a balance, because there's the environment around us, like the walls of the maze we navigate, which have us take certain paths, but there's also the free will of choices. And so there's really a blending between us and other, or the choices and the environment around us. And so philosophically, we can see that if you look at one's overall path through a maze, that yes, there may be points where you can see, oh, we went to this dead end and then backtracked, and that may seem like bad, but more philosophically looking at it, if you just look at the overall thread followed through it, it was still his overall process toward the goal, because like we learn from our mistakes and experiences. So yes, here's a picture, some pictures that show the concept of solving or navigating a maze. And yes, it shows that we can have various ways we can approach the maze of life or spirituality. We can follow it normally or treat it in a standard way where we're doing it blindly. We have the discipline and perseverance to keep going and recognize that there are no shortcuts through the maze. We have to do it properly. However, there can also be creative approaches to maze solving, like one can climb over the walls, as in this picture, as this person's is doing, or we can peek over the walls, as this figure on the left is doing, peeking over the walls to see the way through and can intelligently, creatively navigate it. Or we can like grow our wings and fly over the walls and get through the maze that way. Or even in like a Ray 1 fashion, break through the walls and smash through them. And of course, these are analogous to our approaches, where we can ask ourselves, in what ways do we need to persevere, or in what ways can or should we potentially do alternate approaches to the maze of life and the spiritual path. Just something to contemplate or meditate on. So another relation of the maze to spirituality is the relationship of a maze to a tree or a tree structure, where the paths of a maze they branch, and like there's a path, and then it branches into others, and each one of those branches, and so on. And so it's like a tree structure, and there are important trees in our lives, like the tree of knowledge or the tree of life. And It's related to important parts like our nervous system, which has the nerves that branching from the brain and keep branching, and that creates like a tree structure, as well as our blood system with the main veins from the heart branching, and those are trees, and those are also creates like a maze structure. So in other words, not just life, but our body is like one big maze. And that can be seen in this diagram here, where you can have the kind of the feminine Ida and the masculine Pingala on the sides of the spinal cord, with the Shushumna going up between them, and that symbology is like a maze with its two halves. And you can see this is the same thing here, where there's like the Sushumna solution path, and then the two halves on either side of it forming those trees. And so again, our human body is like a big maze. Another significant relation or symbology related to mazes is the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. And Theseus and the Minotaur describes like the spiritual path, and specifically the path through the labyrinth, which in the mythology was one big giant maze. And the mythological labyrinth, it was like that people were thrown into it, and they would get lost and then eaten by the Minotaur. And that labyrinth can represent in this context as Maya and the challenges of navigating the personality worlds. And then there's the Minotaur from the myth, and the Minotaur was the monster at the center of the labyrinth that would find and slay you. And the Minotaur is like the dweller on the threshold that must be faced and overcome. And then there's Theseus, the Greek hero Theseus, and he volunteered to enter the labyrinth and did so and slayed the Minotaur. And that it symbolizes Theseus as like the disciple, the one who overcomes the personality challenges. And Theseus was aided by Ariadne. And Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, was fell in love with Theseus and then gave him a clue of thread, which allowed him to not get lost and find his way through the labyrinth and follow it out there. And so Ariadne is like the representing the soul, and having that thread that you can follow is like our connection to the soul, and that allows us to keep that connection as we are in the personality worlds. And then one other important archetype in Theseus and the Minotaur is Daedalus. And Daedalus was the creator of the labyrinth, and he designed it, he built it, and he also created the clue of thread and gave to Ariadne, who then gave to Theseus. So Daedalus can represent like the spirit, since Daedalus is like the overall guardian or creator or overseer of the whole process. And so Daedalus can be considered here's why the labyrinth exists in the first place, and so on. And yes, I appreciate this myth, and I gave a 90-minute webinar on this myth that goes into much more detail into these archetypes. It's titled Theseus and the Minotaur, and it's on the makara.us site. So yes, more about Ariadne's clue of thread is the thread symbology is very important, and Ariadne's clue of thread can be like the connection or the antichrona that connects us to our higher potentials, and that guides the seeker through the labyrinth of the Maya worlds. And yes, there is the clue of thread the thread has various examples in the ancient wisdom. Like, for example, there's the Chela on the thread stage of discipleship. And there's again the golden thread meditation that leading to the master DK. And there are a bunch of different quotes in the blue books that deal with the thread on, like, at least four different books. And, like, for example, here's one that talks about the thread which will guide us out of the bewildering maze of thought into which we must perforce enter is the golden one of group love, group understanding, group relations, and group conduct. Another quotation is about that through this illusory panorama, the aspirant has to make his way, finding the clue or thread which will lead him out of the maze, and holding fast to each tiny fragment of reality as it presents itself to him, learning to distinguish truth from glamour, the permanent from the impermanent, and the certainty from the unreal. And yes, the also, thus shall we find the thread of gold which will guide us out of the maze of our present chaotic world condition into the light of truth and understanding. And then one more, he is no longer deluded by the things of the senses, but has in his hand that thread or clue which will eventually guide him out of the maze of the lower life perceptions into the field of clear knowledge and the realm where daylight is found. He will then no longer need to walk in the dark. So yes, the thread appears in many places. So let's take a look at the related concept of a labyrinth. Now, a labyrinth is another important symbol and archetype, and in modern usage, a labyrinth is a single winding path or thread, and that's followed, as opposed to something with junctions like a maze. Now, sometimes the word labyrinth can refer to a maze puzzle, like in the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, that labyrinth, or in the lovely 1986 movie Labyrinth with David Bowie, those were mazes, but still very often labyrinth refers to a single path. And yes, the labyrinth can symbolize the overall journey that we take to the center, minus any dead ends and so on, and it can promote that journey to inner awareness. And the following a labyrinth or walking a labyrinth tends to have three stages. There's a stage of purgation as we make our way into the labyrinth, where we release what's around us, release the personality attachments. Then we reach the center, which brings the stage of illumination. And then finally, there's walking out of the labyrinth, which is an important part too, after reaching the center, which is the stage of union and bringing those insights into our everyday life. This shows that the path isn't just one way, and that we can follow it both directions, and that returning out of the labyrinth, having walked it, is similar to the Ray 1 Capricorn esoteric mantra of lost in my and light supernal, and on that light I turn my back. So coming back out and to the world and not just leaving it behind. So yes, a labyrinth is a walking meditation. So it's often very life-size labyrinths that one can walk as a meditation, which is nice because it's not only spiritual, but it's grounded. And so the labyrinth can represent applied spirituality that brings the divine into the world. And yes, a labyrinth can show aspects of the path, where sometimes when you enter the path, it kind of weaves back and forth, where the finish may seem close, like you may be right next to the center, but the paths, you're actually far away, because the paths will lead you, back out. Or you may seem like you're far away, like on the outer periphery of the labyrinth, when actually you're quite close and only need to take a few more steps to reach the center. And yes, here's another quote about the labyrinth, which is from the Blue Books, that says, "The only way in which we can find the clue to the mystery of the rays, systems, and hierarchies lies in the study of the law of correspondences or analogy. It is the one thread by which we can find our way through the labyrinth." So yes, let's take a look at the door now. And so yes, we have the opening of the door conference theme. So doors are important, and of course they're important for this talk as well. So what is a door? A door is a barrier between one area, like physical area or spiritual area, a barrier between one area and another. And a door tends to hide what's behind it, and versus say like a gate or portal that you can see through. And doors are of many types. A door can be narrow or wide, a door can be grand or humble looking, and a door can be secret or guarded by something. And there's generally a aspiration or desire to open the door or get to what's on the other side, or fear sometimes, that can be true too. But generally a door must be reached or found, like following a path to it, and then the door must be opened. And the door isn't always easy to open even once you're before it. Like you may have to knock and have someone on the other side open it for you. You may have to get a key or find a key and then unlock the door. And that's described in the quote of how each must turn the key with his own hand. And yes, going through a door you don't just pass through. Very often a door requires change in yourself or releasing things. And that's very much aligned with the dweller on the threshold concept. That's, like a guardian on the threshold of the door, and what we must do in order to overcome the dweller of the threshold, or to blend it with the angel of the presence so that we can actually have that freedom to go through the door. Now, it is true that not all doors are good, and not all doors should be opened. Like, of course, from the Great Invocation, there's the phrase, seal the door where evil dwells, and that, of course, shows that, we want to open the right doors. And yes, there is very much a lot of symbology of doors in the ancient wisdom, like the door of initiation. Each initiation is like a door. And also that doors can be created. Like there was the time when the hierarchy actually created these initiatory doors and made them available in the first place for us to pass through. So doors can exist and be brought into existence. Now, a door is not just individual. Doors exist in a group context and can be passed through by groups. Like this quotation from Ray's Initiation says that the door you saw before was a thought form of your separative creation, too narrow for your passing, yet full of wrong allure. Only the man who holds his brother's hand can see the door in truth. Only the man surrounded by the many who are one can enter the door, which shuts itself upon the man who seeks to enter it alone. And another example of a group door is from Rule 1 for disciples and initiates, which has the phrase of, behind the group there stands the door, before them opens out the way, for having already passed through a door. And yes, there are more symbolic doors, like the new group of world servers, just like the boundary or a door between the hierarchy and the kingdom of humanity. And also a point is that a door can disappear once it's passed through. In other words, from a dualistic standpoint, there's like me on this side of the door, and then there's something on the other side of the door. But often once you pass through it into greater love or unity, it's like the door disappears once you're through it, and then you just see all the unity and the connection of the past and present interconnected. So yes, doors can disappear once they're passed through. And about the concept of I am the path and I am the door, this quotation covers both, in which it says that I am the way myself, the door am I. I am the golden path, and in the light of my own light I tread that way. I enter through the door, I turn and radiate the light. So yes, this concept of I am this or I am that, that leads us to the Ray 1 sign Leo and its esoteric mantra, I am that and that am I. So what is this I am? This means that there's not just I am better, or I am better on a personality level, but this is I am that and that am I, is showing that one is unified with the path, with the process, and with divine will. So more about I am. There was a 1990s spiritual group, the very first spiritual group I was a part of, and it was called Antikarana. And it had the phrase or meditation that at the end of like a statement or a decree that says, I am the Antikarana, I am the bridge between heaven and earth. And that's interesting that that's the not just I have an Antikarana, but I am the Antikarana. And we can visualize the Anachrona from different points of view. And we can visualize it from the personality, where there's like the Anachronos extending above me that I can receive like soul inspiration from. But you can also connect with the Anachrona from the point of view of the soul, and being like it can connect you with both spirit and matter, or view the Anachrona from the monad itself, or even view the Antichrona from the point of view of the Anachrona itself, where you're all those levels at once, as well as their connection. So, yeah, so becoming the path, or I am the path, is related to, here's a quotation by Shirley MacLaine, New Age author, in her Out on a Limb book, where she said that first you're in the light, then the light is in you, then you and the light become one. So again, there's that I am thing, where first you're experiencing the light, but then ultimately you and the light become one. And in the ancient wisdom, H.P. Blavatsky has the quotation of saying, "Thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become that path itself." And so again, that's showing that it's not just I am a separate self following a path, or I am a self, following the laws so that I can grow. But it's again showing that there is that identification with the plan and the path and the purpose itself going on. And yes, one more quote about the golden light of love irradiates my path. I am that path. There's another example from the Blue Books. And also there's a bit more quotations on this from the Bible. And there are quotations like, I am the light of the world, and I and my Father are one. And this is showing that it's not Jesus the Christ separate from ourselves, but it's showing not just that, he's that, but it's showing that it's Christ identified with and as the will of God. So it's showing not superiority of some teacher figure, but showing unity of them with divine will. And one more point about like the I am is that we can also be considered as like we are, where we are the path together as humanity, or the New Group of World Servers, and so we are the path and we are the door, is another way to look at it or contemplate it. So yes, this I am concept relates to the spiritual term of identification. And what is identification? It can be summarized as like who and what you perceive or think you are, as well as are not. So we can identify with many different things on different levels of evolution. We can identify with or as our body, or our emotions, or our mind, or our soul, and even the monad, or with the groups that around us that we are a part of. And sometimes one can get upset, at least earlier on, when our ideas of who we identify as are disrupted. Like someone might have a fear of death and then be attached to the body, or have attachments to various nations or other things that they perceive themselves as entangled with or are attached to. Now, but of course there's much vaster concepts of identification too. And this is related to the classic phrase of like, are you a physical person having a spiritual experience, or a spiritual being having a physical experience? And that can be like, we see ourselves as there's a soul and I have a personality, versus that, I am a personality and I'm receiving these insights. Those are important things to consider and and yeah, and can question our identifications. Now, it is the true that, again, most of the identifications that one has until later on, they are relatively limited, but the later initiations are about identification and less about consciousness expansion. Like consciousness expands a lot until like third initiation or so, but then there's later on it's more about greater identification versus greater revelation, which is something to contemplate. So yes, the whole concept of consciousness itself, blend between spirit and matter, is a type of identification where consciousness is kind of like I am this and I am not this. And yes, it can be interesting to meditate upon why you are you. I mean, we can think of like here's the universe, and so why am I me in this body at this time? Why am I not someone else? Or why am I not on another planet or another galaxy? Or why am I human and not like a flower or a solar logos? I mean, it can be interesting to meditate like why am I this fragment of the divine? That can be a mind-bending subject of meditation. And anyway, about identification, there's the concept of identifying with and realizing that we are part of the planet we inhabit. Because there's some that have this spiritual belief that they come to this planet to serve, and therefore they're separate from the planet, and then they can sort of, do this a little bit and then withdraw, as opposed to sharing responsibility for the planet or being the planet or a part of the planet itself. And it shows that we ultimately want to ascend together and not separately. So yes, there are entities that can come and help out, but again, there's the greater identifications, but at least for most of us, we are part of the Earth logos, and we should realize that we are part of the Earth. And even for vaster beings, it's been said that like the solar logos is a group being, and it's not just one big vast entity, but at least how we think of it is that, well, we our quote unquote separate selves are like the monad in extension, and monads are like sparks of the sun, and therefore we are the solar logos in extension. That's something else that can be contemplated on. And yes, these concepts of self versus the whole is summarized in this nice quote, which talks about the two extremes of the divine expression, the sense of individual identity and the sense of universality. These are fused and blended in the one. In the state of being which we call the monadic, no difference is recognized between these two. Because, if I can bring such ideas down to the level of the intelligence of the aspirant, it is realized that there is no identity apart from universality, and no appreciation of the universal apart from the individual realization. So that's a lovely quote. So yes, here's another concept of identification, or the I am, not just I am path, I am door, but here it could be I am funny. And here's one of my favorite quotations. It's by the surrealist painter Salvador Dali, and he said, "I don't take drugs, I am drugs." And I just thought that was funny, but also profound, because it shows that, well, he's not like, taking drugs or seeking fulfillment or things or sensations outside of himself, but he's realizing that, yes, I am weird and creative, and I don't need external things to prop me up, is that it comes from within. And yes, he's focused on himself and not these things outside of himself, and that, yes, and can create very unique and special artwork. So here is another I am, and this is about one of my favorite stories, and it's from Gateless Gate, and it's called Hayakujo's Fox. And here is the story. Once, when Hayakujo delivered some Zen lectures, an old man attended them, unseen by the monks. At the end of each talk, when the monks left, so did he, but one day he remained after they had gone, and Hayakujo asked him, "Who are you?" The old man replied, "I am not a human being, but I was a human being when the Kashapa Buddha preached in this world. I was a Zen master and lived on this mountain. At that time, one of my students asked me whether the enlightened man is subject to the law of causation. I answered him, the enlightened man is not subject to the law of causation. For this answer, evidencing a clinging to absoluteness, I became a fox for 500 rebirths, and I am still a fox. Will you save me from this condition with your Zen words and let me get out of a fox's body? Now, may I ask you, is the enlightened man subject to the law of causation? So yes, we can have a brief contemplation. What do you think the answer is? Meditate on that for a second. And okay, time's up. Let's see. Let's see what he said. So yes, now may I ask you, is the enlightened man subject to the law of causation? Hyakujo said, the enlightened man is one with the law of causation. At the words of Hyakujo, the old man was enlightened. I'm emancipated, he said, paying homage with a deep bow. I am no more a fox, but I have to leave my body in my dwelling place behind this mountain. Please perform my funeral as a monk. Then he disappeared. So what does this mean? Well, first, the fox can represent like animal level superlativeness, and that there was the saying that, oh, you're not subject to the law of causation. That's kind of the arrogance. It's still, he's treating you as a separate being, where the, oh, I am greater and stronger now, and causation and karma no longer affects me. That's has that separation, and because one's separation, they are separate from spirit, and therefore symbolically a fox for any number like 500 rebirths. And so here's a comment by Mumon saying that the enlightened man is not subject. How can this make the monk a fox? The enlightened man is at one with the law of causation. How can this answer make the fox emancipated? And yes, so this gets back into the concept of free will, where there's another analysis of this story that says controlled or not controlled, the same dice shows two faces. Not controlled or controlled, both are a grievous error. And yes, again, it's like free will versus fate. Again, free will suggests that there's an individual. Fate suggests that an individual is being controlled. But when there's that unity, then it really realizes that there's not really it's all just the one. That's why the concept of not controlled or controlled both are a grievous error. Thinking that, oh, I'm no longer controlled, or oh, woe is me, I'm being controlled, both are a grievous error. And that shows the magic of the statement that being one with the law of causation shows that, again, I'm not just trying to manipulate or avoid causation or karma, but I am one with that, and I am an active worker with the divine in promoting this energy and this great expression of divine will. So yeah, another related concept is that of isolated unity, and there are various Blue Book references to isolated unity, such as the Ray 1 technique of fusion is titled Isolated Unity, and also Patanjali's Yoga Sutra number 25 references it. And here is a quotation about isolated unity, which says that isolated unity is that stage of consciousness which sees the whole as one and regards itself not theoretically, but as a realized fact, as identified with that whole. It is a whole which is isolated in the consciousness of the man, and not the man who regards himself as isolated. So yes, isolated unity is very advanced when properly approached or realized. That this quotation describes how isolated unity, it describes the stage which the master has reached, as opposed to isolated identity or identification with the soul, which is that of the disciple up to and including the third initiation. So yes, isolated unity, very advanced, but we can still do our improved identifications to the best of our ability. And yes, if that seems to intellectual, here's a simple quote that can summarize it all, and that is from Rumi saying that you are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. Okay, and that more or less concludes things, but I wanted to include some maze and door links. And one thing is that the Theseus and the Minotaur webinar that I did that I mentioned is on Makara, but it's also on YouTube at this link. And then there's the Daedalus Maze and Labyrinth free software, which is on astrolog.org on the Daedalus HTM page. And then finally mention that there's the Labyrinth Oracle Divination deck that's on the Oracle page there. And so with that, that concludes this presentation. And of course, blessings to all of us on our path. Thank you very much.